There was once a rich old man who had two sons. After his wife passed away, the elder son lived with him and helped him look after his property. For a long time, all went well. The young man got up very early in the morning and worked hard all day. At the end of every week, his father counted up the money they had made and rubbed his hands with delight as he saw how big the pile of gold in the strong iron safe was becoming. It will soon be full now, and I shall have to buy a larger one, he said to himself. And so busy was he with the thought of his money that he did not notice how bright his son's face had grown, nor how he sometimes felt startled when he was spoken to, as if his mind was far away. One day, however, the old man went to the city on business, which he had not done for 3 years at least. It was market day, and he met with many people he knew. It was getting quite late when he turned into an inn and asked the innkeeper to saddle his horse and feed it. While he was waiting in the hall, the landlady came up for a gossip, and after a few remarks about the weather and the vineyard, she asked him how he liked his new daughter-in-law and whether he had been surprised at the marriage. The old man stared as he listened to her. Daughter-in-law? Marriage? He asked, surprised. I don't know what you are talking about. I have got no daughter-in-law, and nobody has been married lately that I have heard of. Now, this was exactly what the very curious landlady wanted to find out. But she put on a look of great alarm and exclaimed, "Oh dear, I hope I have not made mischief. I had no idea, or, of course, I would not have spoken, but..." And here she stopped and fumbled with her apron as if she was greatly embarrassed. "As you have said so much, you will have to say a little more," retorted the old man, a suspicion of what she meant darting across him, and the woman, without any option, answered as before. "Ah, it was not all for buying or selling that your handsome son has been coming to town every week these many months past, and not by the shortest way either. No, it was over the river he rode, and across the hill and past the cottage of Miguel, the vine keeper, whose daughter they say is the prettiest girl in the whole countryside, though she is too white for my taste." And then the landlady paused again and glanced up at the farmer to see how he was taking it. She did not learn much. He was looking straight before him, his teeth set, but as she ceased to talk, he said quietly, "Go on." "There is not much to tell," replied the landlady, for she suddenly remembered that she must prepare supper for the hungry men who always stopped at the inn on market days before starting for home. But one fine morning, they both went to the little church on the top of the hill and were married. My niece is a servant to the priest, and she found out about it and told me. But good day to you, sir. Your horse, I believe, is ready. I must hurry off to the kitchen now." It was a great thing that the horse was sure-footed and knew the road, for its bridle hung loose on its neck, and its master took no heed of the way he was going. When he reached the farmhouse, the man led the animal to the stable and then went to look for his son. "I know everything. You have deceived me. Get out of my sight at once. I am done with you," he stammered, choking with passion as he came up to the young man who was cutting a stick in front of the door, whistling quietly while at it. "But father, you are no son of mine. I have only one now. Begone, or it will be the worse for you." And as he spoke, he lifted up his whip. The young man shrank back. He feared that his father might fall down in a fit. His face was so red and his eyes seemed bustling from his head. But it was no use staying. Perhaps the next morning the old man might listen to reason, though in his heart the son felt that he would never take back his words. So he turned slowly away and walked quietly along a path that ended in a cave on the side of a hill. And there he sat through the night, thinking of what had happened. Yes, he had been wronged. There was no doubt of that, and he did not quite knew how it had come about. He had meant to have told his father all about his marriage, and he was sure, quite sure, that if once the old man had seen his wife, he would have forgiven him on account of her great beauty and goodness. But he had put it off from day to day, hoping always for a better opportunity, and now this appeared to be the end. Both the son and his father had no sleep that night, and as soon as the sun rose, he sent a messenger into the great city with orders to bring back the younger brother. When he arrived, the farmer did not waste words but informed him that he was now his only heir and would inherit all his lands and money, and that he was to come and live at home and help manage the property. Though very pleased at the thought of becoming such a rich man, for the brothers had never cared much for each other, the younger would rather have stayed where he was, for he soon got tired of the country and longed for town life. However, he kept this to himself and made the best of things, working hard like his elder brother before him. In this way, the years went on, but the crops were not so good as they had been, and the old man gave orders that the fine house he was building in the city should be left unfinished, for it would take all the savings to complete it. As to the elder son, he would never even hear his name mentioned and passed on at last without ever seeing his face, leaving to the younger, as he had promised, all his lands as well as his money. In the meantime, the son whom he had disinherited had grown poorer and poorer. He and his wife were always looking out for something to do and never spent a penny that they could save. But luck was against them, and at the time of his father's passing, they had hardly bread to eat or clothes to cover them. If they had been only himself, he would have managed to get on somehow. But he could not bear to watch his children becoming weaker day by day, and swallowing his pride, he eventually crossed the mountains to his old home where his brother was living. It was the first time in a long while that the two men had come face to face, and they looked at each other in silence. Then tears rose in the eyes of the elder, but winking them hastily away, he said, "Brother, it is not necessary that I should tell you how poor I am. You can see that for yourself. I have not come to beg for money, but only to ask if you will give me the unfinished house of yours in the city, and I will make it watertight, so that my wife and children can live in it, and that will save us rent, for as it is, it doesn't profit you." And the younger brother listened and pitied him, and gave him the house that he asked for, and the elder went away happy. For some years, things went on as they were, and then the rich brother began to feel lonely and thought to himself that he was getting older and it was time for him to be married. The wife he chose was very wealthy, But she was also very greedy, and however much she had, she always wanted more. She was, besides, one of those unfortunate people who sincerely believe that their possessions must be better than everyone else. Most of the time, her poor husband regretted the day that he had first seen her, and often her meanness and shabby ways put him to shame. But he didn't have the courage to tackle her, and she only got worse and worse. After she had been married a few months, the bride wanted to go into the city and buy herself some new dresses. She had never been there before, and when she had finished her shopping, she thought she would pay a visit to her unknown sister-in-law and rest for a bit. The house she was seeking was in a broad street and ought to have been very magnificent, but the entrance was a little door of rough wood, while a row of beautiful pillars led to nothing. The walls on each side were in the same unfinished condition, and water trickled down the walls. Most people would have considered it a wretched place and turned their backs on it as soon as they could. But this lady saw that by spending some money, the house could be made as splendid as it was originally intended to be, and she instantly resolved to get it for herself. Full of this idea, she walked up the marble staircase and entered the little room where her sister-in-law sat, making clothes for her children. The bride seemed full of interest in the house and asked many questions about it, so that her new relations liked her much better than they had initially expected and hoped they might be good friends. However, as soon as she reached home, she went straight to her husband and told him that he must get back the house from his brother, as it would exactly suit her, and she could easily make it into a palace as fine as the king's. But her husband only told her that she might buy a house in some other part of the town, for she could not have the one she requested, as she had long made a gift of it to his brother, who had lived there for many years past. At this answer, the wife grew very angry. She began to cry and made such a noise that all the neighbors heard her and put their heads out of the windows to see what was the matter. "It is absurd," she sobbed out, "quite unjust, indeed. If you come to think of it, the gift was worth nothing, as when my husband made it, he was a bachelor, and since then he had been married, and I never gave my consent to any such thing." And so she lamented all day and all night, till the poor man was nearly worried to death. And at last he did what she wished, and summoned his brother in a court of law to give up the house which he said had only been lent to him. But when the evidence on both sides had been heard, the judge decided in favor of the poor man, which made the rich lady more furious than ever, and she determined not to rest until she had gained the day. If one judge would not give her the house, another should, and so time after time the case was tried over again, till at last it came before the highest judge of all in the city of Evora. Her husband was very tired and ashamed of the whole affair, but his weakness in not putting a stop to it in the beginning had got him into this difficulty, and now he was forced to go on. On the same day, the two brothers set out on their journey to the city, the rich one on horseback with plenty of food in his knapsack, the poor one on foot with nothing but a piece of bread and 4 onions to eat on the way. The road was hilly, and neither could go very fast, and when night fell, they were both glad to see some lights in a window a little distance in front of them. The light turned out to have been placed there by a farmer who had planned to have a particular good supper as it was his wife's birthday, and upon request asked the rich man enter and sit down while he himself took the horse to the stable. The poor man asked timidly if he might spend the night in a corner, adding that he had brought his own supper with him. Ordinarily, the farmer would have refused him the request, for the farmer was no lover of poor people. But somehow, he gave the elder brother leave to come in, pointing out a wooden chair where he could sit. Supper was soon served, and very gladly the younger brother ate it, for his long ride had made him very hungry. The farmer's wife, however, would touch nothing, and at last declared that the only supper she wanted was one of the onions the poor man was cooking at the fire. Of course, he gave it to her, though he would gladly have eaten it himself, as 3 onions are not much at the end of a long day's work. And soon after they all went to sleep, the poor man making himself as comfortable as he could in his corner. A few hours later, the farmer was aroused by the cries and groans of his wife. "Oh, I feel so ill. I am sure I'm going to die," she wept bitterly. "It was that onion. I knew it was. I wish I had never eaten it. It must have been poisoned," she lamented. "If the man has poisoned you, he shall pay for it," said her husband, and seizing a thick stick, he ran downstairs and began to beat the poor man who had been sound asleep and had nothing to defend himself with. Luckily, the noise aroused the younger brother, who jumped up and snatched the stick from the farmer's hand, saying, "We are both going to Evora to try a lawsuit. Come too and accuse him there if he has attempted to rob or murder you. But don't kill him now, or you will get yourself into trouble." "Well, perhaps you are right," answered the farmer. "But the sooner that fellow has justice served, the better I shall be pleased." And without more words, he went to the stable and brought out a horse for himself, and also the black beast ridden by the rich man, while the poor brother, fearing more ill treatment, started once again on foot. Now, all that night it had rained heavily and did not seem likely to stop, and in some places the road was so thick with mud that it was almost impossible to get across it. In one spot it was very bad that a camel laden with baggage had got stuck in it, and try as he might, his master was quite unable to pull it out. The camel master, in despair, appealed to the 2 horsemen who were carefully skating the swamp at some distance off, but they paid no heed to his cries, and he began to talk cheerfully to his camel, hoping to keep up its spirit, declaring that if the poor beast would only have a little patience, help was sure to come. And so it was, for very soon the poor brother reached the place, covered with mud from head to foot, but ready to do all he could to help with the camel and its master. First, they set about finding some strong logs of wood to lay down on the mesh so that they could reach the camel, for by this time its frantic struggle had broken its bridle, and it was deeper in the mud than ever. Stepping cautiously along the wood, the poor man got hold of the animal's tail, and with a desperate effort the camel managed to regain its footing on dry ground, but at the cost of leaving its tail in the poor man's hand. When he saw this, the camel owner's anger knew no bound, and forgetting that without the help given him he would have lost his camel altogether, he began to abuse the poor man, declaring that he had ruined his beast and the law would make him pay for it. Then jumping on the back of the camel, which was so glad to be out of the choking mud that it did not seem to mind the loss of its tail. The ungrateful wrench rode on, and that evening reached the inn at Evora, where the rich man and the farmer had already arrived for the night. Meanwhile, the poor brother walked wearily along, wondering what other dreadful adventures were in store for him. I shall certainly be condemned for one or another of them, he thought sadly. And after all, if I have to meet my ancestors, I would rather go on my own terms than leave it to my enemies. And as soon as he entered Evora, he looked about for a place suitable for carrying out the plan he had made. At length, he found what he sought, but as it was too late and too dark for him to make sure of success, so he coiled himself up under a doorway and slept till morning. Although it was still winter, the sun rose in a clear sky and its rays felt almost warm when the poor man got up and shook himself. He intended to be the day of his transition to glory. But in spite of that, and of the fact that he was leaving his wife and children behind him, he felt almost cheerful. He had struggled so long and was very, very tired, but he would not have minded that if he could have proved his innocence and triumph over his enemies. However, they had all been too clever for him, and he had no strength to fight anymore. So he mounted the stone steps that led to the entrance of the city and stopped for a moment to gaze about him. It happened that an old sick man who lived nearby had begged to be carried out and to be laid at the foot of the wall so that the beams of the rising sun might fall upon him, and he would be able to talk with his friends as they passed by to their work. Little did he guess that on top of the battlement, exactly over his head, stood a man who was taking his last look at the same sun before going to join his ancestors before him. But so it was, and as the sun beamed its rays on the towers, the poor man shut his eyes and sprang forward. The wall was high, and he flew rapidly through the air, but it was not the ground he touched, only the body of the sick old man, who rolled over and breathed his last without as much as a groan. As for the poor man, he was quite unhurt and was slowly rising to his feet when his arms were suddenly seized and held. "You have eliminated our father. Do you see? Do you see?" cried two young men. "You will come with us this instant before the judge and answer for it." "Your father? But I don't know him." "What do you mean?" asked the poor man, who was quite surprised with his sudden rush through the air, and could not think why he should be accused of this fresh crime. But he got no reply, and was only hurried through the streets to the courthouse, where his brother, the camel owner, and the farmer had just arrived, all as angry as ever, all talking at once, till the judge entered and ordered them to be silent. "I will hear you one by one," he said, and mentioned the younger brother to begin. He did not take long to state his case. The unfinished house was his, left him with the rest of the property by his father, and his brother refused to give it up. In answer, the poor man explained in a few words how he had begged the house from his brother, and produced the deed of gift which made him its owner. The judge listened quietly and asked a few questions. Then he gave his verdict. "The house shall remain the property of the man to whom it was given, and to whom it belongs. And as you," he added, turning to the younger brother, "you brought this accusation, knowing well it was wicked and unjust. I order you, beside losing the house, to pay £1,000 damages to your brother." The rich man heard the judge with rage in his heart, the poor man with surprise and gratitude. But he was not safe yet. For now, it was the turn of the farmer. The judge could hardly conceal a smile at the story and inquired if the wife had joined her ancestors before the farmer left the house, and received for answer that he was in such a hurry for justice to be done that he had not waited to see. Then the poor man told his tale, and once more judgment was given in his favour, while £2,000 was ordered to be paid him. As for the camel owner, he was informed very plainly that he had proved himself mean and ungrateful for the help that had been given him, and as a punishment, he must pay to the poor man a fine of £100 and hand him over the camel till its tail had grown again. Lastly, there came the two sons of the sick old man. "This is the wretch who eliminated our father," they said, "and we demand that he should be executed too." "How did you eliminate him?" asked the judge, turning to the accused. And the poor man told how he had leaped from the wall, not knowing that anyone was beneath. "Well, this is my judgment," replied the judge. When they had all spoken, "Let the accused sit under the wall, and let the sons of the late man jump from the top and fall on him and eliminate him. And if they will not do this, then they are condemned to pay £800 for their false accusation." The young men looked at each other and slowly shook their heads. "We will pay the fine," said they, and the judge nodded. So the poor man rode the camel home and brought back to his family enough money to keep them in comfort to the end of their days.